why Russian crude prices surged ahead of fresh new U.S. sanctions. Next on the Energy Newsbeat Daily Stand-Up.
Trump to outline AI priorities in a speech next week. What implications for energy and the grid reliability? This is a huge story, Michael, in a highly anticipated address set for July 23rd, 2025. President Trump will deliver a speech titled Winning the AI Race, hosted by the White House AI and crypto czar David Sachs, along co-hosts from an all-in podcast. That's pretty darn cool. But let's get in here. And you also have Secretary Doug Burgum on a X post. Big news for America Future, $90 billion in AI and investments for new data center that's going on. You're taking a look at the Trump tariffs have brought in an enormous amount of money, but this is all in on data centers and grid reliability. However, Trump's subsequent actions suggest a continuation of his pro-innovation stance, potentially building or reshaping these efforts. The DOE has been at the forefront of these initiatives. I got to hand it to the DOE. Michael, we talked about their report on how they are talking about grid stability. Remember, we talked about having only 20 new gigawatts of either nuclear or natural gas with another, 200 of wind and solar. They got a real problem. And so this is going to be critical as we take a look at this. I got to hand it to the DOE. They recognize it's a problem, and Chris Wright is handling it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's great that they're taking AI seriously. I do. It is interesting that it's all aimed at its rivalry with China, as in now all of a sudden, since we always got to make sure we have an enemy somewhere, because if we don't have an enemy somewhere, well, where would we spend all our weapons technology? Where, Raytheon wouldn't get a stock upgrade every 6 months when they release earnings. So wow. So I say all that just to say I'm all in on this. No pun intended. I'm not the biggest all in podcast guy. Polyapatia is not my favorite dude from that standpoint. But I do think that this idea of taking AI seriously is critical. But I think we need to take it seriously for our own reasons, not just do this compete with China. And that's where I think a lot of this AI leadership comes in, gets a little bit wonky, because go back to what I said, they're looking at a way to always make sure we've got a big bully that we can fight and spend hundreds of billions of dollars on defense so that our big four primes can have a great quarterly earnings report. I do think from the DOE standpoint, as you mentioned, it is really helpful that we're taking this seriously, because AI is going to cause a strain on the grid. So if you are talking about how to win the AI race, you really should be talking about how to win the energy race. That really comes before all of this stuff. And,
Yep. And that's exactly what I mentioned in here, Michael. I'm interviewing J.U. Found tomorrow, and he is the founder of Nano Nuclear Energy, and he's been on CNBC and a few others. And he's a cool cat. This will be his second interview. So when we get CEOs that come back, it means that they actually see value in coming on the podcast. So that's pretty cool.
We love it. All right. What's next?
Let's go to this next story. This one's from Andrew Corriabocco. Trump's major statement on Russia is a clumsy attempt to thread the needle. Michael, this article from his Substack, he sent it to me and said, what do you think? And I said, well, after reviewing it, Andrew, I think you're quite right. And that's why I went ahead and published it. It is a validation of our article that we had yesterday, which was very important. And that is the major statement on Russia that Trump earlier hyped up and turned out to be a clumsy attempt to thread the needle between radically escalating U.S. involvement in the Ukrainian conflict and walking away from it. His new three-pronged approach includes the rapid dispatch of up to 17 Patriot missile systems, 2 more arms sale to NATO countries who in turn transfer them to Ukraine, and 3 up to 100% secondary sanctions on Russia. Let's take these a bit at a time. I talked about it yesterday. You talked about it yesterday. The 100% secondary actions on LNG and crude oil on India and China will be a disaster for the Trump administration. His domestic advisory team and his secretaries running the U.S. domestic policy are on fire. They're on target and they know what they're doing. His guys running this one missed the boat. In fact, they're on the USS Minnow. And they went for a 3-hour cruise. And I think they just picked up the Ukrainian SEALs that blew up the Nord Stream. Trump's attempt to thread the needle, therefore, isn't just clumsy, but it could also majorly backfire. This is a validation to my other point that I made yesterday, and that was this could win the midterms. It's that bad, Michael.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Trump has fumbled Russia, and that's the crazy part about all of this. I mean, Trump bills himself as art of the deal. I can get along with everybody. And this is the art of how not to enforce a deal, because Putin is basically like, who is this guy? This is not the guy that I thought I'd be negotiating against. Trump's a little bit all over the place. We don't even have to get into the Epstein stuff, which I think is a whole nother can of worms out there that we'll leave aside. Point of the matter is, I completely agree with Andrew's newsletter here. I'd highly recommend you following it on Substack. And quite frankly, it's a little disappointing and what we've gotten to relative to at least what we were promised.
It is. And here's the sad part. I had all these interviews with George McMillan that went nowhere. We know that people in the administration absolutely read his material, and George was right all along. And so now I'm sitting over here going, guys, we've had solutions for 6 months. But let's go to this next story here, Michael. Russia crude shipments gain ahead of the Trump sanctions threat. Listen to this. Russia's seaborne crude exports climbed to their highest level in nearly a month, averaging 3.23 million barrels per day in the 4 weeks ending July 13th. Talk about the day of validation. This could almost be like a movie plot. The energy newsbeat gets validated, and not a parking ticket, but we get validated for what we're writing. Trump's sanction and ultimatum is an immediate context. And you sit back and take a look at 2025. Look at the chart in this article. USA LNG, and they're still buying Russian LNG and natural gas through the pipelines. It's just amazing. And when they try to, what happens when they get rid of it? Deindustrialization. I'm going to go to the last story here for fun. Peak oil not on the horizon as global oil consumption reaches an all-time high. Michael, I had a blast writing this one. Look at the chart on this bed. Global oil consumption, 1965 to 2024, and it's keep on going. Far from fading, oil's dominance persists, challenging narratives from a swift transition away from hydrocarbons, shifting trends in fossil fuels, natural gas on the rise, oil steady, coal resurgent, coal is king again. But listen to this. There's one line in here. We have never been in an energy transition. We've only been in an expensive energy addition. Stu Turley. Wow. You went on mute on there, oh mighty man.
Of course. It's like we're back in 2020. Hey, you're on mute. Knock, knock, knock. You're on mute. This is a great article, because I think what this shows you is the two competing. A great friend who we've done a lot of work for, Tisha Schuler, she's got this idea, two things can be true at the same time.
Right.
And I love that phrase, and I use it often because two things can be true. We can have global consumption at all-time highs, but we can also be at a point where we're in an undersupplied market. And what you're showing here is that the global oil consumption balanced with where supply is shows you that that's true, but also peak oil is not going anywhere. Now, Is the growth of oil production going to roll over? Well, absolutely. Is United States oil production going to roll over? Yeah, I could make an argument that U.S. production might fall year over year.
Right.
It might. But you have to look at a macro view. Oil is a global commodity traded. If you're in Hawaii, you don't touch American oil. Especially if you're in California, outside of Newsom's hair gel, you don't touch American products. So
you touch 2% of Alaskan oil. That's it.
Absolutely. So I think this is a great overview of kind of showing like two things can be true here. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see what comes of this. And that's the funny part, is you're not hearing anybody yell peak oil right now. You would think people are pounding the table in this very moment talking about peak oil. Well, they're not. What they're talking about is a slight decline in U.S. shale, but that doesn't mean the rest of the world is not going to continue to pound the table for this stuff.
No. And so as you sit back and take a look, I did mention in there, why did EVs not take away more demand? It's the old hybrid will. Hybrids will have more impact on demand on gasoline and eventually diesel when the big haul machines ever get to a hybrid facility. But I think we'll see LNG trucks before we see hybrid big trucks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's jump over here and quickly touch on some finance stuff, guys. But before we do that, let's quickly pay the bills. As always, thank you for checking us out here on the world's greatest website, w.energynewsbeat.com. Check us out. Link in the description below for all timestamps, all links to the articles. Also, subscribe to us on Substack, theenergynewsbeat.substack.com. It's a great place to find a combination of energynewsbeat.com in one feed delivered to your inbox every morning with Stu and mine's thoughts. I might be a little scary to get inside Stu's mind, but if you want to get inside Stu's mind, it's a crazy place. Trust me, I've been there multiple times. I've luckily gotten out, but it's also a fascinating understanding of how the global energy and oil and gas markets intertwine. Highly recommend subscribing, theenergynewsbeat.substack.com, link in the description below. Also, shout out to friends of the show, Reese Energy Consulting. We love everything about Reese Energy Consulting. If you are in the midstream space or associated with the midstream space and you're not working with Reese Energy Consulting, you're doing them and yourself a disservice. Call them up. If you're in upstream space and need help with your marketing contracts, if you're a midstream company and need any sort of support services, if you're brokering jet fuel or crude oil, call up Reese Energy Consulting. They have clients from everywhere from two guys in the garage all the way up to the largest publicly traded companies and everybody in between. So if you're wondering if you're a right fit for them, you are ReeseEnergyConsulting.com. And finally, guys, if you are dealing with a tax problem this year, there is no better investment no better investment vehicle to offset your tax income than invest in oil and gas. It's the most tax efficient product that also has cash flow associated with it. Sure, there are other products that maybe have a larger raw tax deduction, but they do not have the dividends or distributions associated with it. So if you are interested in learning about how you can get involved with this tax deductions, go to investinoil.energynewsbeat.com. We'll send you a great ebook which kind of overviews all of the different ways you could consider investing in oil and gas to get that tax deduction. And then depending on the answers that you fill out, we may or may not point you in the right direction to talk to some of the experts that we trust, guys. That's investinoil.energynewsbeat.com. Let's go ahead and look at top line indices, Stu. You know, we got S&P 500 down about 0.4 of a percentage point. NASDAQ was actually up about 0.2 of a percentage point, but it's fallen precipitously since the open here, or in the last, I would say, 15, 20 minutes of us recording. So pretty interesting there. 2 and 10-year yields up about 1.2 and 1.08 percentage points, respectively. Dollar index up about 0.5 percentage point. Bitcoin off its all-time highs from 20,000 down to about 116,500. Crude oil down about 0.5 percentage point. Brent oil basically flat for the day, slightly down though if you take into account the earlier trading session. 66.66 for crude oil, 68.74 for Brent. Natural gas up about 1.5 percentage points to $3.51. XOP, which is our E&P securities contract, 128.76. OIH, which is our oilfield services contract, down 3 percentage points to 236.82. I think when we look at oil prices, Stu, we're still down about $1 relative to where we were yesterday. A lot to do with the fallout continuing from President Trump, you know, quote unquote sanctions on buyers of Russian crude. And these are more threats than they are actual, here's what's going to happen. It's that 50-day timeline, and then in the same breath, he announced new weapons for Ukraine. It's really crazy. Didn't he run on a platform of not giving them more weapons? It really boggles my mind. Quote from Phil Flynn, Price Futures Group, the market took it as a negative because there seemed to be a lot of time to negotiate. The fear of immediate sanctions on Russian oil is further off in the future than the market thought this morning. And what he's referring to is the little bit of the rally that we saw early in the trading session, though it ended up a little bit down. We mentioned yesterday yesterday there could be, and there's the threatened of 100% tariffs on China. As we talked yesterday, that's not going to happen. They're not going to put 100% tariffs on China. API crude oil inventory will come out. They're forecasting about a 3 million barrel draw. So we'll see exactly where that shakes out. As you listen to this, you will see the IEA crude oil inventory report, which drops at 10:30 Eastern, 9:30 Standard. And our final stories to ExxonMobil borrows crude from SPR due to crude quality issue. This is very interesting. ExxonMobil has secured a loan of up to 1 million barrels of crude oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to address quality issues with its Mars crude, which is a key Gulf of America oil blend that comes from their Mars platform. Here's what happens. This quality has really stems from what they found were elevated zinc levels in Mars crude, which, if it's ran through a refinery, can cause corrosion and damage equipment if it's processed in enough large quantities. Mars is mainly produced in the Gulf of America. Let's be very clear there, Gulf of America. And it's a medium sour grade crude blend, which generally is used for gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. Basically, they've cut the production at their Baton Rouge facility, which has a total capacity of about 520,000 barrels per day, and has attempted to resell some affected cargoes in the spot market. Very interesting, Stu, because this is what the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is designed for. It's designed for things like this, unexpected consequences that happen from things that are out of our control, aka higher levels of zinc in your crude. Now, if we just go on releasing oil because we want to drive prices down to try to win elections, you find yourself in a pinch when all of a sudden now we may need to borrow, maybe it's 1 million a day. That's pretty believable. They want to loan only about 1 million barrels, but if this turns into 2 million, 3 million, now all of a sudden you end up in this situation where you've used all your reserves on something that's not worthy of a reserve, aka we're just trying to drive the price down. So this is truly, truly what the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is used for, and it goes to show you why using it for the proper use, which you have a section on, is so critical.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And for our podcast listeners, Michael was absolutely waving his hands just like Gavin Newsom on that podcast that he was on. So quick, slick your hair back. And your arms were going like, holy smokes, Batman. That was a great Gavin Newsom imitation. Well done.
Oh, come on, man.
Come on, man.
He said on that whole podcast. Unbelievable, Stu. All right, what did we miss today, Stu? Anything else we need to add?
No, we got lots of great things coming around the corner.
All right, guys. Well, with that, we're going to let you get out of here. Get back to work. Start your day. Appreciate you guys checking us out. World's greatest podcast, EnergyNewsbeat.com. For Stuart, Turley, and Michael Tanner. We'll see you tomorrow.